Kesa Kudoku, The Merit of the Kashaya, by Eihei Dogen. From Shobogenzo, The Treasury of the True Dharma Eye. The authentic transmission into China of the robe and the Dharma, which are authentically transmitted from Buddha to Buddha and from patriarch to patriarch, was done only by the founding patriarch of Sugaku Peak. The founding patriarch was the 28th patriarch after Shakyamuni Buddha, the transmission having passed 28 times in India, from rightful successor to rightful successor. The 28th patriarch went to China in person and became the first patriarch there. The transmission then passed through 5 Chinese masters and reached Soke, the 33rd patriarch, whom we call the 6th patriarch. Zen Master Daikan, the 33rd patriarch, received the authentic transmission of this robe and Dharma on Obaizan Mountain in the middle of the night, after which he guarded and retained the robe throughout his life. It is still deposited at Horinji Temple on Sokezan Mountain. Many successive generations of emperors devoutly asked for the robe to be brought to the imperial court, where they served offerings and made prostrations to it, guarding it as a sacred object. The Tang dynasty emperors, Chuso, Shukuso, and Daiso, frequently had the robe brought to court and served offerings to it. When they requested it, and when they sent it back, they would conscientiously dispatch an imperial emissary and issue an edict. The Emperor Daiso once returned the Buddha robe to Sokezan Mountain with the following edict: I now dispatch the great General Ryu Soke, pacifier of the nation, to receive with courtesy and to deliver the robe. I consider it to be a national treasure. Venerable priests, deposit it according to the Dharma in its original temple. Let it be solemnly guarded only by monks who have intimately received the fundamental teaching. Never let it fall into neglect. Truly, better than ruling a 3,000 great thousandfold realm of worlds, as countless as the sands of the Ganges, to see and to hear and to serve offerings to the Buddha's robe as the king of a small country where the Buddha's robe is present, may be the best life among all good lives lived in life and death. Where, in a 3,000-fold world which has been reached by the Buddha's influence, could the Kashaya not exist? At the same time, the one who passed on the authentic transmission of the Buddha's Kashaya, having received the face-to-face transmission from rightful successor to rightful successor, is only the ancestral patriarch of Sugaku Peak. The Buddha's Kashaya was not handed down through side lineages. The transmission to Bodhisattva Bhadrapala, a collateral descendant of the 27th patriarch, duly arrived at Dharma teacher Jo, but there was no authentic transmission of the Buddha's Kashaya. Again, the great master Doshin, the 4th patriarch in China, delivered Zen Master Hoyu of Gozu-san Mountain, but did not pass on the authentic transmission of the Buddha's Kashaya. So even without the transmission from rightful successors, the Tathagata's right Dharma, whose merit is never empty, confers its wide and great benefit all through thousands of ages and myriads of ages. At the same time, those who have received the transmission from rightful successors are not to be compared with those who lack the transmission. Therefore, when human beings and gods receive and retain the Kashaya, they should receive the authentic transmission transmitted between Buddhist patriarchs. In India and in China, in the ages of the right Dharma and the imitative Dharma, even lay people received and retained the Kashaya. In this distant and remote land, in the present degenerate age, those who shave their beard and hair and call themselves the Buddha's disciples do not receive and retain the Kashaya. They have never believed, known, or clarified that they should receive and retain the Kashaya. It is lamentable. How much less do they know of the Kashaya's material, colour, and measurements? How much less do they know how to wear it? The Kashaya has been called, since ancient time, the clothing of liberation. It can liberate us from all hindrances, such as karmic hindrances, hindrances of affliction, and hindrances of retribution. If a dragon gets a single strand of the Kashaya, it escapes the 3 kinds of heat. If a bull touches a Kashaya with one of its horns, its sins will naturally be extinguished. When Buddhas realize the truth, they are always wearing the Kashaya. Remember, to wear the Kashaya is the noblest and highest virtue. Truly, we have been born in a remote land in the age of the latter Dharma, and we must regret this. But at the same time, how should we measure the joy of meeting the robe and the Dharma which have been transmitted from Buddha to Buddha, from rightful successor to rightful successor? Which other lineage has authentically transmitted both the robe and the Dharma of Shakyamuni in the manner of our authentic transmission? Having met them, who could fail to venerate them and to serve offerings to them? Even if, each day, we have to discard bodies and lives as countless as the sands of the Ganges, we should serve offerings to them. Indeed, we should vow to meet them, humbly to receive them upon the head, to serve offerings to them, and to venerate them in every life, in every age. Between us and the country of the Buddha's birth, there are more than 100,000 miles of mountains and oceans, and it is too far for us to travel. Nevertheless, promoted by past good conduct, we have not been shut out by the mountains and oceans, and we have not been spurned as the dullards of a remote land. Having met this right Dharma, we should persistently practice it day and night. Having received and retained this Kashaya, we should perpetually receive it upon the head in humility and preserve it. How could this only be to have practiced merit under one Buddha or 2 Buddhas? It may be to have practiced all kinds of merit under Buddhas equal to the sands of the Ganges. Even if the people who receive and retain the Kashaya are ourselves, we should venerate them and we should rejoice. We should heartily repay the profound benevolence of the ancestral master in transmitting the Dharma. Even animals repay kindness, so how could human beings fail to recognize kindness? If we failed to recognize kindness, we might be more stupid than animals. The merits of this Buddha robe and this Buddha Dharma were never clarified or known by anyone other than the ancestral master who transmitted the Buddha's right Dharma. If we want to follow gladly the traces of the Buddhas, we should just be glad about this transmission. Even after 100,000 myriads of generations, we should esteem this authentic transmission as the authentic transmission. This transmission may be the Buddha Dharma itself. The proof in due course will become evident. We should not liken the transmission to the dilution of milk with water. It is like a crown prince succeeding to the throne. When we want to use milk, if there is no milk other than this diluted milk described above, although it is diluted milk, we should use it. Even when we do not dilute it with water, we must not use oil, we must not use lacquer, and we must not use wine. This authentic transmission may also be like that. Even a mediocre follower of an ordinary master, providing the authentic transmission is present, may be in a good situation to use milk. But more to the point, the authentic transmission from Buddha to Buddha and from patriarch to patriarch is like the succession of a crown prince. Even secular teaching says, one does not wear clothing different from the official uniform of the previous reign. How could disciples of the Buddha wear robes different from the Buddha's robe? Since the 10th year of the Eihei era, during the reign of Emperor Komei of the later Han dynasty, monks and laymen going back and forth between the western heavens and the eastern lands have followed on each other's heels without cease, but none has claimed to have met in the western heavens an ancestral master of the authentic transmission from Buddha to Buddha and from patriarch to patriarch. None has a record of the lineage of the face-to-face transmission from the Tathagata. They have only followed teachers of sutras and commentaries and brought back Sanskrit books of sutras and philosophy. None speaks of having met an ancestral master who is a rightful successor to the Buddha's Dharma. And none mentions that there are ancestral masters who have received the transmission of the Buddha's Kashaya. Clearly, they have not entered beyond the threshold of the Buddha's Dharma. People like this have not clarified the principle of the authentic transmission by Buddhist patriarchs. When Shakyamuni Tathagata passed to Mahakasyapa, the right Dharma eye treasury, and the supreme state of Bodhi, he transmitted them together with a Kashaya, received in the authentic transmission from Kasyapa Buddha. Received by rightful successor from rightful successor, the Kashaya reached Zen Master Daikan of Sokezan Mountain the 33rd generation. The material, colour, and measurements of the Kashaya had been transmitted intimately. Since then, the Dharma descendants of Seigen and Nangaku have intimately transmitted the Dharma, wearing the Dharma of the ancestral patriarchs and keeping the Dharma of the ancestral patriarchs in order. The method of washing the Kashaya and the method of receiving and retaining the Kashaya cannot be known without learning in practice in the inner sanctum of the legitimate face-to-face transmission of those methods. The Kashaya is said to include 3 robes. They are the 5-stripe robe, the 7-stripe robe, and the large robe of 9 or more stripes. Excellent practitioners receive only these 3 robes and do not keep other robes. To use just the 3 robes serves the body well enough. When we are attending to business or doing chores, and when we are going to and from the toilet, we wear the 5-stripe robe. For doing good practices among the Sangha, we wear the 7-stripe robe. To teach human beings and gods, and to make them devout, we should wear the large robe of 9 or more stripes. Or when we are in a private place, we wear the 5-stripe robe. When we go among the Sangha, we wear the 7-stripe robe. And when we go into a royal palace or into towns and villages, we should wear the large robe. Or when it is nice and warm, we wear the 5-stripe robe. When it is cold, we put on the 7-stripe robe as well. And when the cold is severe, we also put on the large robe. Once, in ancient times, the weather on a midwinter night was cold enough to split bamboo. As that night fell, the Tathagata put on the 5-stripe robe. As the night passed and it got colder, he put on the 7-stripe robe as well. Later on in the night, when the coldness reached a peak, he also put on the large robe. At this time the Buddha thought, in future ages when the cold is beyond endurance, good sons should be able to clothe their bodies adequately with these 3 robes. The method of wearing the Kashaya. To bear only the right shoulder is the usual method. There is a method of wearing the Kashaya so that it goes over both shoulders, a form followed by the Tathagata and veterans who are senior in years and experience. Both shoulders are covered, while the chest may be either exposed or covered. The method of covering both shoulders is for a large Kashaya of 60 or more stripes. Usually, when we wear the Kashaya, we wear both sides over the left arm and shoulder. The front edge goes over the left side of the Kashaya and hangs over the left upper arm. In the case of the large Kashaya, this front edge passes over the left shoulder and hangs down behind the back. There are various methods of wearing the Kashaya besides these. We should take time to research them and should inquire into them. For hundreds of years, through one dynasty after another, Liang, Chen, Sui, Tang, and Sung, many scholars of both the large and the small vehicles have abandoned the work of lecturing on sutras, recognizing that it is not the ultimate and progress to learn the authentically transmitted Dharma of the Buddhist patriarchs. When they do so, they inevitably shed their former shabby robes and receive and retain the authentically transmitted Kashaya of the Buddhist patriarchs. This is indeed the abandonment of the false and the return to the true. In discussing the right Dharma of the Tathagata, we see the Western heavens as the very root of the Dharma. Many teachers of human beings, past and present, have established small views based on the sentimental and parochial thinking of the common man. Because the world of Buddha and the world of living beings are beyond being limited and being unlimited, the teachings, practice, and human truths of the Mahayana and the Hinayana can never fit inside the narrow thoughts of common men today. Nevertheless, common men in China, acting at random, have failed to see the Western heavens as the root, and have considered their newly devised limited small views to be the Buddha Dharma. Such facts should never occur. Therefore, if people today who have established the mind want to receive and to retain the Kashaya, they must receive and retain the Kashaya of the authentic transmission. They must not receive and retain a Kashaya newly created according to the idea of the moment. The Kashaya of the authentic transmission means the one that has been authentically transmitted from Shaolin Temple and Soke Mountain, the one that has been received by the Tathagata's rightful successors without missing a single generation. The Kashaya worn by their Dharma children and Dharma grandchildren is the traditional Kashaya. What has been newly created in China is not traditional. Now the Kashaya worn by the monks who have come from the Western heavens in the past and present are all worn as the Kashaya authentically transmitted by the Buddhist patriarchs. Not one of these monks has worn a Kashaya like the new Kashaya being produced in China today by precept scholars. Dull people believe in the Kashaya of precept scholars. Those who are clear throw such robes away. In general, the merit of the Kashaya, transmitted from Buddha to Buddha and from patriarch to patriarch, is evident and easy to believe in. Its authentic transmission has been received exactly. Its original form has been handed down personally, and it exists really in the present. The Buddhist patriarchs have received and retained it, and succeeded to each other's Dharma until today. The ancestral masters, who have received and retained the Kashaya, are all masters and disciples who experience the state and receive the transmission of Dharma. This being so, we should make the Kashaya properly, according to the method for making the Kashaya, which has been authentically transmitted by the Buddhist patriarchs. This alone is the authentic tradition, and so it has long been experienced and recognized by all common and sacred beings, human beings and gods, and dragons and spirits. Having been born to meet the spread of this Dharma, if we cover our body with the Kashaya only once, receiving it and retaining it for just a kasana or a muhurta, That experience will surely serve as a talisman to protect us in the realization of the supreme state of Bodhi. When we dye the body and mind with a single phrase or a single verse, it becomes a seed of everlasting brightness, which finally leads us to the supreme state of Bodhi. When we dye the body and mind with one real Dharma, or one good deed, it may be also like this. Mental images arise and vanish instantaneously. They are without an abode. The physical body also arises and vanishes instantaneously. It too is without an abode. Nevertheless, the merit that we practice always has its time of ripening and shedding. The Kashaya, similarly, is beyond elaboration and beyond non-elaboration. It is beyond having an abode and beyond having no abode. It is that which Buddhas alone, together with Buddhas, perfectly realize. Nevertheless, practitioners who receive and retain the Kashaya always accomplish the merit that is thus to be gained, and they always arrive at the ultimate. Those without past good conduct, even if they pass through one life, 2 lives, or countless lives, can never meet the Kashaya, can never wear the Kashaya, can never believe in the Kashaya, and can never clearly know the Kashaya. In China and Japan today, we see that there are those who have had the opportunity to clothe their body once in the Kashaya, and there are those who have not. The difference depends neither upon high or low status, nor upon stupidity or wisdom. Clearly, it was determined by past good conduct. This being so, if we have received and retained the Kashaya, we should feel glad about our past good conduct, and should not doubt the accumulation of merit and the piling up of virtue. If we have not got the Kashaya yet, we should hope to get it. We should strive without delay to sow the first seeds of receiving and retaining the Kashaya in this life. Those who are prevented by some hindrance from receiving and retaining the Kashaya should repent and confess before the Buddha Tathagatas and the 3 treasures of Buddha, Dharma and Sangha. How living beings in other countries must wish, if only the robe and the Dharma of the Tathagata had been authentically transmitted and were intimately present in our country as they are in China. Their shame must be deep and their sadness tinged with resentment that the authentic tradition has not passed into their own country. Why are we so fortunate to have met the Dharma in which the robe and the Dharma of the Tathagata, the world-honoured one, have been authentically transmitted? It is the influence of the great merit of prajna, nurtured in the past. In the present corrupt age of the latter Dharma, some are not ashamed that they themselves have no authentic transmission, and they envy others who possess the authentic transmission. I think they may be a band of demons. Their present possessions and abodes, which are influenced by their former conduct, are not true and real. Just to devote themselves to and to venerate the authentically transmitted Buddha Dharma, this may be their real refuge in learning the state of Buddha. In sum, remember that the Kashaya is the object of the Buddha's veneration and devotion. It is the body of the Buddha and the mind of the Buddha. We call it the clothing of liberation, the robe of a field of happiness, the robe without form, the supreme robe, the robe of endurance, the robe of the Tathagata, the robe of great benevolence and great compassion, the robe which is a banner of excellence, and the robe of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. We should receive and retain it like this, humbly receiving it upon the head. Because it is like this, we should never change it according to our own mind. As material for the robe, we use silk or cotton, according to suitability. It is not always the case that cotton is pure and silk is impure. There is no viewpoint from which to hate cotton and to prefer silk. That would be laughable. The usual method of the Buddhas in every case is to see rags as the best material. There are 10 sorts and 4 sorts of rags, namely burned, chewed by an ox, gnawed by rats, from clothes of dead people, and so forth. The people of the 5 areas of India discarded rags like these in streets and fields as if they were filth, and so they called them filthy rags. Practitioners picked them up, washed them, and sewed them, and used them to cover the body. Among those rags, there are various kinds of silk and various kinds of cotton. We should throw away the view which discriminates between silk and cotton, and study rags in practice. When, in ancient times, the Buddha was washing a robe of rags in Lake Anavatapta, the Dragon King praised him with a rain of flowers and made prostrations of reverence. Some teachers of the small vehicle have a theory about transformed thread, which also may be without foundation. People of the great vehicle might laugh at it. What kind of thread is not transformed thread? When those teachers hear of transformation, they believe their ears. But when they see the transformation itself, they doubt their eyes. Remember, in picking up rags, there may be cotton that looks like silk, and there may be silk that looks like cotton. There being myriad differences in local customs, it is hard to fathom nature's creation. Eyes of flesh cannot know it. Having obtained such material, we should not discuss whether it is silk or cotton, but should call it rags. Even if there are human beings or gods in heaven who have survived as rags, they are never sentient beings. They are just rags. Even if there are pine trees or chrysanthemums that have survived as rags, they are never sentient beings. They are just rags. Even if there are pine trees or chrysanthemums that have survived as rags, they are never insentient beings. They are just rags. When we believe the principle that rags are not silk or cotton, and not gold, silver, pearl, or jewel, rags are realized. Before we have got rid of views and opinions about silk and cotton, We have never seen rags even in a dream. On one occasion, a monk asked the eternal Buddha, "Should we see the robe you received on Obai in the middle of the night as cotton, or should we see it as silk? In short, as what material should we see it?" The eternal Buddha says, "It is not cotton and it is not silk." Remember, it is a profound teaching of the Buddha's truth that the Kashaya is beyond silk and cotton. The Venerable Shanavasa is third in the transmission of the Dharma treasury. He has been endowed with a robe since birth. While he is a layman, this robe is a secular garment, but when he leaves home, it turns into a kashaya. In another case, the bhikshuni Sukra, after establishing the will and being clothed in a cotton robe, has been born with a robe in every life and middle existence. On the day that she meets Shakyamuni Buddha and leaves home, the secular robe which she has had since birth changes instantly into a kashaya, as in the case of Venerable Shanavasa. Clearly, the kashaya is beyond silk, cotton, and so forth. Moreover, the fact that the virtue of the Buddha Dharma can transform body and mind, and all dharmas, is as in those examples. The truth is evident that when we leave home and receive the precepts, body and mind, subject and object change at once. It is only because we are stupid that we do not know. It is not true that the usual rule of the Buddhas applies only to Shanavasa and to Sukra, but not to us. We should not doubt that benefit accrues in accordance with individual standing. We should consider such truths in detail and learn them in practice. The kashaya that covers the body of the monks whom the Buddha welcomes to take the precepts is not necessarily cotton or silk. The Buddha's influence is difficult to consider. The precious pearl within the robe is beyond those who count grains of sand. We should clarify and should learn in practice that which has quantity and that which is without quantity, that which has form and that which is without form, in the material, colour and measurements of the kashaya of the Buddhas. This is what all the ancestral masters of the western heavens and the eastern lands, past and present, learned in practice and transmitted as the authentic tradition. If someone is able to see and to hear a master in whom there is nothing to doubt, the authentic transmission from patriarch to patriarch being evident, but fails without reason to receive the authentic transmission from this ancestral master, such smugness would be hard to condone. The extent of this stupidity might be due to unbelief. It would be to abandon the real and to pursue the false, to discard the root and to seek after branches. It would be to slight the Tathagata. People who wish to establish the Bodhi mind should always receive the authentic transmission of an ancestral master. Not only have we met the Buddha Dharma, which is so difficult to meet, also, as Dharma descendants in the authentic transmission of the Buddha's Kashaya, we have been able to see and to hear, to learn and to practice, and to receive and to retain the authentic transmission of the Buddha's Kashaya. This is just to see the Tathagata himself. It is to hear the Buddha's preaching of Dharma. It is to be illuminated by the Buddha's brightness. It is to receive and to use what the Buddha received and used. It is to receive the one-to-one transmission of the Buddha's mind. It is to have got the Buddha's marrow. It is to be covered directly by Shakyamuni Buddha's Kashaya. And it is Shakyamuni Buddha himself, directly bestowing the Kashaya upon us. Because we follow the Buddha, we have devoutly received this Kashaya. The method of washing the Kashaya. Put the Kashaya, unfolded, into a clean tub. Then immerse the Kashaya in fragrant, fully boiled hot water and leave it to soak for about 2 hours. Another method is to soak the Kashaya in pure, fully boiled ash water and to wait for the water to cool. Nowadays, we usually use the hot ash water method. Hot ash water is what we call aku no yu here in Japan. When the ash water has cooled, rinse the Kashaya again and again in clean and clear hot water. During the rinsing, do not put in both hands to scrub the Kashaya, and do not tread on it. Continue until any dirt or grease has been removed. After that, mix aloes, sandalwood, or other incense into some cold water and rinse the Kashaya. Then hang it on a washing pole to dry. After it is thoroughly dry, fold it and put it in a high place. Burn incense and scatter petals. Walk around it several times with the Kashaya to the right and perform prostrations. After making 3 prostrations, 6 prostrations, or 9 prostrations, kneel up and join the hands. Then hold the Kashaya up with both hands, and in the mouth recite the verse in praise of the Kashaya. After that, stand up and put on the Kashaya according to the method. The World-Honoured One addresses the Great Assembly. In the ancient past, when I was in the order of the Buddha Jewel Treasury, I was the Bodhisattva Great Compassion. At that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Great Compassion made the following vow before the Buddha Jewel Treasury. World-Honoured One, if, after I became a Buddha, there were living beings who had entered my Dharma and left home, and who wore the Kashaya, even if they were bhikshus, bhikshinis, upasakas, and upasikas, who had accumulated heavy sins by violating the grave prohibitions, by enacting false views, or by contemptuously disbelieving the three treasures. And in a single moment of consciousness, the reverence arose in their mind to honor the Samgati robe, and the reverence arose in their mind to honor the world-honored one, or the Dharma and the Sangha. But, world-honored one, even one among those living beings could not, in one of the three vehicles, receive affirmation, and as a result regressed or went astray. It would mean that I had deceived the Buddhas who are present now in the worlds of the 10 directions, and in countless, infinite asamkhya kalpas, and I surely should not realize Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. World-honored one, after I have become a Buddha, if gods, dragons and demons, and human and non-human beings are able to wear this kashaya, to venerate, to serve offerings to honor, and to praise it, as long as those people are able to see a small part of this kashaya, they will be able not to regress while within the three vehicles. When living beings are afflicted by hunger or thirst, whether they are wretched demons, miserable people, or living beings in the state of hungry ghosts, if they are able to obtain a piece of the kashaya, even as small as 4 inches, they will at once be able to eat and drink their fill, and to accomplish quickly whatever they wish. When living beings offend each other, causing ill will to arise and a fight to develop, or when gods, dragons, demons, Gandharva, Ashura, Garuda, Kinnara, Mahoraga, Kumbhanda, Pisaka, and human and non-human beings are fighting each other, if they remember this kashaya, in due course, by virtue of the power of the kashaya, they will beget the mind of compassion, soft and flexible mind, mind free of enmity, serene mind, the regulated mind of virtue, and they will get back the state of purity. When people are in an armed conflict, a civil lawsuit, or a criminal action, if they retain a small piece of this kashaya as they go among these combatants, and if in order to protect themselves they serve offerings to, venerate and honor it, these other people will be unable to injure, to disturb, or to make fools of them. They will always be able to beat their opponents and to come through all such difficulties. World-honored one, if my kashaya were unable to accomplish these 5 sacred merits, it would mean that I had deceived the Buddhas who are present now in the worlds of the 10 directions, and in countless, infinite asamkhya kalpas, and in future I ought not to accomplish Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, or to do Buddhist works. Having lost the virtuous Dharma, I would surely be unable to destroy non-Buddhism. Good sons, At that time the Tathagata Jewel Treasury extended his golden right arm and patted the head of Bodhisattva Great Compassion, praising him with these words: very good, stout fellow. What you have said is a great and rare treasure, and is great wisdom and virtue. When you have realized Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi, this robe, the Kashaya, will be able to accomplish these 5 sacred merits and to produce great benefit. Good sons, at that time the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Great Compassion, after hearing the praise of that Buddha, jumped endlessly for joy. Then the Buddha again extended his golden arm, with its hand of long webbed fingers, as soft as the robe of a goddess. When he patted the Bodhisattva's head, the Bodhisattva's body changed at once into the youthful figure of a man of 20. Good sons, in that order, the great assembly of gods, dragons, deities, Gandharva, and human and non-human beings, with folded hands, venerated Bodhisattva Great Compassion. They served him offerings of all kinds of flowers. They even made music and offered that. And they also praised him in all kinds of ways, after which they abode in silence. From the age when the Tathagata was in the world until today, whenever the merits of the Kashaya are quoted from the sutras and the Vinaya of Bodhisattvas and Shravakas, these 5 sacred merits are always considered fundamental. Truly, Kashayas are the Buddha robes of the Buddhas of the 3 times. Their merits are measureless. At the same time, to get the Kashaya in the Dharma of Shakyamuni Buddha may be even better than to get the Kashaya in the Dharma of other Buddhas. The reason, if asked, is that in the ancient past, when Shakyamuni Buddha was in the causal state, as the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Great Compassion, when he offered his 500 great vows before the Buddha Jewel Treasury, he pointedly made the above vows in terms of the merits of this Kashaya. Its merits may be utterly measureless and unthinkable. This being so, the authentic transmission to the present of the skin, flesh, bones and marrow of the world-honoured one is the Kashaya robe. The ancestral masters who have authentically transmitted the right Dharma treasury have, without exception, authentically transmitted the Kashaya. The living beings who have received and retained this robe and humbly received it upon their heads have, without exception, attained the truth within 2 or 3 lives. Even when people have put the Kashaya on their body for a joke or for gain, it has inevitably become the causes and conditions for attaining the truth. The ancestral master Nagarjuna says, further, in the Buddha Dharma, people who have left family life, even if they break the precepts and fall into sin, after they have expiated their sins, they can attain liberation. As the Bhukshini Utpalavana explains in the Jataka Sutra, when the Buddha is in the world, this Bhukshini attains the 6 mystical powers and the state of an arhat. She goes into the houses of nobles and constantly praises the method of leaving family life, saying to all the aristocratic ladies, "Sisters, you should leave family life." The noble women say, "We are young and our figures are full of life and beauty. It would be difficult for us to keep the precepts. Sometimes we might break the precepts." The Bhikshuni says, "If you break the precepts, you break them. Just leave family life." They ask, "If we break the precepts, we will fall into hell. Why should we want to break them?" She answers, "If you fall into hell, you fall." The noble women all laugh at this, saying, "In hell we would have to receive retribution for our sins. Why should we want to fall into hell?" The Bhikshuni says, "I remember in my own past life, once I became a prostitute, wore all sorts of clothes, and spoke in old-fashioned language. One day, I put on a Bhikshuni robe as a joke, and due to this direct and indirect cause, at the time of Kasyapa Buddha, I became a Bhikshuni. I was still proud then of my noble pedigree and fine features. Vanity and arrogance arose in my mind, and I broke the precepts. Because of the wrongness of breaking the precepts, I fell into hell and suffered for my various sins. But after I had suffered retribution, I finally met Shakyamuni Buddha, transcended family life, and attained the 6 mystical powers and the truth of an arhat. Thus, I know that when we leave family life and receive the precepts, even if we break the precepts, due to the precepts as direct and indirect causes, we can attain the truth of an arhat. If I had only done bad, without the precepts as direct and indirect causes, I could not have attained the truth. In the past, I fell into hell in age after age. When I got out of hell, I became a bad person, and when the bad person died, I went back into hell, and there was no gain at all. Now therefore I know from experience that when we leave family life and receive the precepts, even if we break the precepts, with this as a direct and indirect cause, we can attain the Bodhi effect. The primary cause of this Bhikshuni Utpalavana attaining the truth as an arhat is just the merit of her putting the kashaya on her body for a joke. Because of this merit and no other merit, she has now attained the truth. In her second life, she meets the Dharma of Kasyapa Buddha and becomes a Bhikshuni. In her third life, she meets Shakyamuni Buddha and becomes a great arhat, equipped with the 3 kinds of knowledge and the 6 powers. The 3 kinds of knowledge are supernatural insight, knowing past lives, and ending the superfluous. The 6 powers are the power of mystical transmutation, the power to know others' minds, the power of supernatural sight, and the power of supernatural hearing, the power to know past lives, and the power to end the superfluous. Truly, when she was only a wrongdoer, she died and entered hell to no avail, coming out of hell and becoming a wrongdoer again. But when she has the precepts as direct and indirect causes, although she has broken the precepts and fallen into hell, they are the direct and indirect causes of her attaining the truth at last. Now even someone who has worn the kashaya for a joke can attain the truth in her third life. How then could someone who has established pure belief and who wears the kashaya for the sake of the supreme state of Bodhi fail to accomplish that merit. Still further, if we receive and retain the Kashaya throughout our life, humbly receiving it upon the head, the merit might be universal and great beyond measure. Any human being who would like to establish the Bodhi mind should receive and retain the Kashaya, and humbly receive it upon the head, without delay. To have met this favourable age, but not to have sown a Buddhist seed, would be deplorable. Having received a human body on the southern continent, having met the Dharma of Shakyamuni Buddha, and having been born to meet an ancestral master who is a perfectly legitimate successor to the Buddha Dharma, if we idly passed up the chance to receive the Kashaya, which has been transmitted one-to-one, and which is directly accessible, that would be deplorable. Now, in regard to the authentic transmission of the Kashaya, the one authentic transmission from the ancestral master is right and traditional. Other masters cannot stand shoulder to shoulder with him. Even to receive and to retain the Kashaya, following a master who has not received the transmission, is still of very profound merit. But much more than that, if we receive and retain the Kashaya from a true master who has quite legitimately received the face-to-face transmission, we may really be the Dharma children and the Dharma grandchildren of the Tathagata himself, and we may actually have received the authentic transmission of the Tathagata's skin, flesh, bones, and marrow. The Kashaya, in conclusion, has been authentically transmitted by the Buddhas of the 3 times and the 10 directions, without interruption. It is what the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, Shravakas, and Pratyeka Buddhas of the 3 times and the 10 directions have, in like manner, guarded and retained. Coarse cotton cloth is the standard material for making the Kashaya. When there is no coarse cotton cloth, we use fine cotton cloth. When there is neither coarse nor fine cotton cloth, we use plain silk. When there is neither plain silk nor cotton cloth, materials such as pattern cloth or sheer silk may be used. These are all approved by the Tathagata. For countries where there is no plain silk, cotton, patterned cloth, sheer silk, or anything of the kind, the Tathagata also permits the leather Kashaya. Generally, we should dye the Kashaya blue, yellow, red, black, or purple. Whichever colour it is, we should make it a secondary colour. The Tathagata always wore a flesh-coloured Kashaya. This was the colour of the Kashaya. The Buddha's Kashaya, transmitted by the first patriarch, was blue-black, and made of the cotton crepe of the western heavens. It is now on Shobogenzo mountain. It was transmitted 28 times in the western heavens, and transmitted 5 times in China. Now the surviving disciples of the eternal Buddha of Soke, who have all received and retained the ancient customs of the Buddha's robe, are beyond other monks. Broadly, there are 3 kinds of robe. 1. The robe of rags. 2. The robe of fur. And 3. The patched robe. Rags are as explained previously. In the robe of fur, the fine down and hair of birds and beasts is called fur. When practitioners cannot obtain rags, they pick up this fur and make it into the robe. The patched robe describes our sewing and patching and wearing, cloth that has become ragged and worn with age. We do not wear the fine clothes of the secular world. The venerable monk Upali asked the world-honoured one, "World-honoured Vedanta, how many stripes does the Samgati robe have?" The Buddha says, "There are 9 kinds. What are the 9 kinds? They are the Samgati robe of 9 stripes, 11 stripes, 13 stripes, 15 stripes, 17 stripes, 19 stripes, 21 stripes, 23 stripes, and 25 stripes." The first 3 of those kinds of Samgati robe have 2 long segments and 1 short segment in each stripe, and we should keep the standard like this. The next 3 kinds have 3 long segments and 1 short, and the last 3 kinds have 4 long and 1 short. Anything with more segments per stripe than this becomes an unorthodox robe. Upali again addresses the world-honoured one. "World-honoured Vedanta, how many kinds of Samgati robe are there?" The Buddha says, "There are 3 kinds, larger, medium, and smaller. The larger is 3 cubits long by 5 cubits wide. The smaller is 2.5 cubits long by 4.5 cubits wide. Anything between these 2 is called medium." Upali again addresses the world-honoured one. "World-honoured Vedanta, how many stripes does the Uttara Samga robe have?" The Buddha says, "It only has 7 stripes, each with 2 long segments and 1 short segment." Upali again addresses the world-honoured one. "World-honoured Vedanta, how many kinds of 7-striped robe are there?" The Buddha says, "There are 3 kinds, larger, medium, and smaller. The larger is 3 cubits by 5. The smaller is a half cubit shorter on each side. And anything between these 2 is called medium." Upali again addresses the world-honoured one. "World-honoured Vedanta, how many stripes does the Antavasa robe have?" The Buddha says, "It has 5 stripes, each with 1 long segment and 1 short segment." Upali again addresses the world-honoured one. "How many kinds of Antavasa robe are there?" The Buddha says, "There are 3 kinds, larger, medium, and smaller. The larger is 3 cubits by 5. The medium and the smaller are as before." The Buddha says, "There are 2 further kinds of Antavasa robe. What are these 2? The first is 2 cubits long by 5 cubits wide, and the second is 2 cubits long by 4 cubits wide." The Sangati is translated as the double-layered robe. The Uttara Sangha is translated as the upper robe, and the Antavasa is translated as the under robe or as the inner robe. At the same time, the Samgati robe is called the large robe and also called the robe for entering royal palaces, or the robe for preaching the Dharma. The Uttara Sangha is called the seven-striped robe, or called the middle robe, or the robe for going among the Sangha. The Antavasa is called the five-striped robe, or called the small robe, or the robe for practicing the truth and for doing work. We should guard and retain these three robes without fail. Among Samgati robes is the Kashaya of 60 stripes, which also deserves to be received and retained without fail. In general, the length of a Buddha's body depends on the span of its lifetime, which is between 80,000 years and 100 years. Some say that there are differences between 80,000 years and 100 years, while others say that they may be equal. We esteem the insistence that they may be equal as the authentic tradition. The body measurements of Buddhas and of human beings are very different. The human body can be measured, but the Buddha body ultimately cannot be measured. Therefore, in the present moment in which Shakyamuni Buddha puts on the Kashaya of Kasyapa Buddha, the Kashaya is not long and not wide. And in the present moment in which Maitreya Tathagata puts on the Kashaya of Shakyamuni Buddha, it is not short and not narrow. We should reflect upon clearly, decide conclusively, understand completely, and observe carefully that the Buddha body is not long or short. King Brahma, though high in the world of matter, does not see the crown of the Buddha's head. Maudgalyana, having gone far into the world of the bright banner, does not discern the Buddha's voice. It is truly a mystery that the Buddha's form and voice are the same whether seen and heard from far or near. All the merits of the Tathagata are like this, and we should keep these merits in mind. As regards methods of cutting out and sewing the Kashaya, there is the robe of separate stripes, the robe of added stripes, the robe of pleated stripes, and the single sheet robe. Each of these is a proper method. We should receive and retain the kind of robe that accords with the material obtained. The Buddha says, "The Kashaya of the Buddhas of the 3 times is invariably back-stitched." In obtaining the material, again, we consider pure material to be good, and we consider so-called filthy rags to be the purest of all. The Buddhas of the 3 times all consider rags to be pure. In addition, cloth offered by devout donors is also pure. There again, cloth bought at a market with pure money is also pure. There are limits on the number of days within which the robe should be made, but in the present degenerate age of the latter Dharma, in a remote country, it may be better for us to receive and to retain the robe by doing the cutting and sewing whenever we are promoted by belief. It is an ultimate secret of the great vehicle that lay people, whether human beings or gods, receive and retain the Kashaya. King Brahma and King Sakra have now both received and retained the Kashaya, and these are excellent precedents in the worlds of volition and matter. excellent precedents in the human world are beyond calculation. All lay bodhisattvas have received and retained the Kashaya. In China, Emperor Bu of the Liang dynasty and Emperor Yang of the Sui dynasty both received and retained the Kashaya. The Emperors Daiso and Shikuso both wore the Kashaya, learned in practice from monks, and received and retained the Bodhisattva precepts. Other people, such as householders and their wives who received the Kashaya and received the Buddhist precepts, are excellent examples in the past and present. In Japan, when Prince Shutoku received and retained the Kashaya and lectured on sutras such as the Lotus Sutra and the Srimala Sutra, he experienced the miraculous omen of precious flowers raining from the heavens. From that time, the Buddha Dharma spread throughout our country. Though Prince Shotoku was the regent of the whole country, he was just a guiding teacher to human beings and gods. As the Buddha's emissary, he was father and mother to many living beings. In our country today, although the materials, colours, and measurements of the Kashaya have all been misunderstood, that we can see and hear the word Kashaya is due solely to the power of Prince Shotoku. We would be in a sorry state today if at that time he had not destroyed the false and established the true. Later, the Emperor Shomu also received and retained the Kashaya and received the Bodhisattva precepts. Therefore, whether we are emperors or subjects, we should receive and retain the Kashaya, and we should receive the Bodhisattva precepts without delay. There can be no greater happiness for a human body. It has been said that the Kashayas received and retained by lay people are either called single-stitched or called secular robes. That is, they are not sewn with back stitches. It is also said that when lay people go to a place of practicing the truth, they should be equipped with the 3 Dharma robes, a willow twig, rinsing water, mealware, and a sitting cloth. They should practice the same pure practices as bhikkhus. Such were the traditions of a master of the past. However, the tradition that has now been received one-to-one from the Buddhist patriarchs is that the Kashayas transmitted to kings, ministers, householders and common folk are all backstitched. An excellent precedent is that Master Daikan Eno had already received the authentic transmission of the Buddha's Kashaya as the temple servant Ro. In general, the Kashaya is the banner of a disciple of the Buddha. If we have already received and retained the Kashaya, we should humbly receive it upon the head every day. Placing it on the crown of the head, we join the hands and recite the following verse. Dai sai geda puku muso fuku denne hibu nyorai kyo kodo shoshu jo. How great is the clothing of liberation, formless field of happiness robe. devoutly wearing the Tathagata's teaching, widely I will save living beings. After that, we put it on. In the Kashaya, we should feel like our master and should feel like a tower. We also recite this verse when we humbly receive the Kashaya on the head after washing it. The Buddha says, when we shave the head and wear the Kashaya, we are protected by the Buddhas. Each person who transcends family life is served by gods and men. Clearly, once we have shaved the head and put on the Kashaya, we are protected by all the Buddhas. Relying on this protection of the Buddhas, a person can roundly realize the virtues of the supreme state of Bodhi. Celestial throngs and human multitudes serve offerings to such a person. The World-Honored One says to the Bhikkhu Wisdom Brightness, the Dharma robe has 10 excellent merits. 1. It is able to cover the body, to keep away shame, to fill us with humility, and to make us practice good ways. 2. It keeps away cold and heat, as well as mosquitoes, harmful creatures, and poisonous insects, so that we can practice the truth in tranquility. 3. It manifests the form of a Shramana who has left family life, giving delight to those who behold it, and keeping away wrong states of mind. 4. The Kashaya is just the manifestation to human beings and gods of a precious flag. Those who honor and venerate it are able to be born in a Brahma heaven. 5. When we wear the Kashaya, we feel that it is a precious flag. It is able to extinguish sins and to produce all kinds of happiness and virtue. 6. A fundamental rule in making the Kashaya is to dye it a secondary colour, so that it keeps us free from thoughts of the 5 desires and does not give rise to lust. 7. The Kashaya is the pure robe of the Buddha, for it eradicates afflictions forever and makes them into a fertile field. 8. When the Kashaya covers the body, it extinguishes the karma of sins and promotes at every moment the practice of the 10 kinds of good. 9. The Kashaya is like a fertile field, for it is well able to nurture the Bodhisattva way. 10. The Kashaya is also like a suit of armour, for it makes the poisoned arrows of affliction unable to do harm. Wisdom brightness. Remember, through these causes, when the Buddhas of the 3 times and Pratyeka Buddhas and Shravakas and pure monks and nuns cover the body in the Kashaya, these 3 groups of sacred beings sit as one on the precious platform of liberation, take up the sword of wisdom to destroy the demons of affliction, and enter together into the many spheres of nirvana, which have one taste. Then the World-Honored One speaks again in verse. Bhikkhu, wisdom brightness, listen well. The great field of happiness robe has 10 excellent merits. Secular clothes increase taintedness from desire. The Tathagata's Dharma attire is not like that. Dharma attire fends off social shame, but fills us with the humility that produces a field of happiness. It keeps away cold and heat and poisonous insects. Firming our will to the truth, it enables us to arrive at the ultimate. It manifests the form of a monk and keeps away greed. It eradicates the 5 views and promotes right practice. To look at and bow to the Kashaya's form of a precious banner, and to venerate it, produces the happiness of King Brahma. When a disciple of the Buddha wears the robe and feels like a tower, this produces happiness, extinguishes sins, and impresses human beings and gods. True Shramanas, of modest appearance, showing respect, are not tainted in their actions by secular defilements. The Buddhas praise the Kashaya as a fertile field. They call it supreme in giving benefit and joy to living beings. The mystical power of the Kashaya is unthinkable. It can cause us to practice deeds that plant the seeds of Bodhi. It makes the sprouts of the truth grow like spring seedlings. The wonderful effect of Bodhi being like autumn fruit. The Kashaya is a true suit of armour, as hard as a diamond. The poisoned arrows of affliction can do no harm. I have now briefly praised the 10 excellent merits. If I had successive kalpas to expound them widely, there would be no end. If a dragon wears a single strand of the Kashaya, it will escape the fate of becoming food for a Garuda. If people retain this robe when crossing the ocean, they need not fear trouble from dragonfish or demons. When thunder roars, lightning strikes, and the sky is angry, someone who wears the Kashaya is fearless. If one clothed in white is able personally to hold and retain the Kashaya, all bad demons are unable to approach. If that person is able to establish the will and seeks to leave home, shunning the world and practicing the Buddha's truth, all the demon palaces of the 10 directions will quake and tremble, and that person will quickly experience the body of the Dharma King. These 10 excellent merits broadly include all the merits of the Buddha's truth. We should explicitly learn in practice the merits present in these long lines and short verses of praise, not just glancing over them and quickly putting them aside, but researching them phrase by phrase over a long period. These excellent merits are just the merits of the Kashaya itself. They are not the effect of a practitioner's fierce pursuit of merit through perpetual training. The Buddha says, the mystical power of the Kashaya is unthinkable. It cannot be supposed at random by the common man or sages and saints. In general, when we quickly experience the body of the Dharma King, we are always wearing the Kashaya. There has never been anyone since ancient times who experienced the body of the Dharma King without wearing the Kashaya. The best and purest material for the robe is rags, whose merits are universally evident in the sutras, precepts and commentaries of the great vehicle and small vehicle. We should inquire into these merits under those who have studied them widely. At the same time, we should also be clear about other materials for the robe. These things have been clarified and authentically transmitted by the Buddhas and the Patriarchs. They are beyond lesser beings. The Middle Agama Sutra says, "Furthermore, wise friends, suppose there is a man whose bodily behavior is pure, but whose behavior of mouth and mind is impure. If wise people see the impurity and feel anger, they must dispel it. Wise friends, suppose there is a man whose bodily behavior is impure, but whose behavior of mouth and mind is pure. If wise people see the impurity and feel anger, they must dispel it. How can they dispel it? Wise friends, they should be like a forest bhikkhu with rags, looking among the rags for worn cloth to be thrown away, and for cloth soiled by feces or urine, or by tears and spit, or stained by other impurities. After inspecting a rag, the bhikkhu picks it up with the left hand and stretches it out with the right hand. If there are any parts which are not soiled by feces, urine, tears, spit, or other impurities, and which are not in holes, the bhikkhu tears them off and takes them. In the same way, wise friends, if a man's bodily behavior is impure, but the behavior of mouth and mind is pure, do not think about his body's impure behavior. Only be aware of his pure behavior of mouth and mind. If wise people feel anger at what they see, they must dispel it like this. This is the method by which a forest bhikkhu collects rags. There are 4 sorts of rags and 10 sorts of rags. When gathering these rags, we first pick out the parts which have no holes. We should then also reject the parts that cannot be washed clean, being too deeply soiled with long accumulated stains of feces and urine. We should select those parts that can be washed clean. The 10 sorts of rags. 1. Rags chewed by an ox. 2. Rags gnawed by rats. 3. Rags scorched by fire. 4. Rags soiled by menstruation. 5. Rags soiled by childbirth. 6. Rags offered at a shrine. 7. Rags left at a graveyard. 8. Rags offered in petitional prayer. 9. Rags discarded by a king's officers. 10. Rags brought back from a funeral. These 10 sorts people throw away. They are not used in human society. We pick them up and make them into the pure material of the Kashaya. Rags have been praised and have been used by the Buddhas of the 3 times. Therefore, these rags are valued and defended by human beings, gods, dragons, and so on. We should pick them up to make the Kashaya. They are the purest material and the ultimate purity. Nowadays in Japan, there are no such rags. Even if we search, we cannot find any. It is regrettable that this is a minor nation in a remote land. However, we can use pure material offered by a donor, and we can use pure material donated by human beings and gods. Alternatively, we can make the Kashaya from cloth brought at a market with earnings from a pure livelihood. Such rags and cloth obtained from a pure livelihood are not silk, not cotton, and not gold, silver, pearls, patterned cloth, sheer silk, brocade, embroidery, and so on. They are just rags. These rags are neither for a humble robe nor for a beautiful garment. They are just for the Buddha Dharma. To wear them is just to have received the authentic transmission of the skin, flesh, bones, and marrow of the Buddhas of the 3 times, and to have received the authentic transmission of the right Dharma Eye treasury. We should never ask human beings and gods about the merit of this transmission. We should learn it in practice from the Buddhist patriarchs. During my stay in Song, China, when I was making effort on the long platform, I saw that my neighbour, at the end of every sitting, would lift up his Kashaya and place it on his head. Then, holding his hands together in veneration, he would quietly recite a verse. The verse was, Dai Sai Geidatsu Fuku Muzu Fuku Denne Ibun Yorai Kyo Kodo Shoshu Jo. How great is the clothing of liberation, formless field of happiness robe, devoutly wearing the Tathagata's teaching, widely I will save living beings. At that time, there arose in me a feeling I had never before experienced. My body was overwhelmed with joy. The tears of gratitude secretly fell and soaked my lapels. The reason was that when I had read the Agama Sutras previously, I had noticed sentences about humbly receiving the Kashaya on the head, but I had not clarified the standards for this behavior. Seeing it done now, before my very eyes, I was overjoyed. I thought to myself, it is a pity that when I was in my homeland, there was no master to teach this, and no good friend to recommend it. How could I not regret, how could I not deplore passing so much time in vain? Now that I am seeing and hearing it, I can rejoice in past good conduct. If I had vainly stayed in my home country, how could I have sat next to this treasure of a monk, who has received the transmission of, and who wears the Buddha's robe itself? The sadness and joy was not one-sided. 1,000 myriad tears of gratitude ran down. Then I secretly vowed, one way or another, unworthy though I am, I will become a rightful successor to the Buddha Dharma. I will receive the authentic transmission of the right Dharma, and out of compassion for living beings in my homeland, I will cause them to see and to hear the robe and the Dharma, which have been authentically transmitted by the Buddhist patriarchs. The vow I made then has not been in vain now. Many bodhisattvas, in families and out of families, have received and retained the Kashaya. This is something to rejoice in. People who have received and retained the Kashaya should humbly receive it upon the head every day and night. The merit of this may be especially excellent and supremely excellent. The seeing and hearing of a phrase or a verse may be as in the story of On Trees and On Rocks, and the seeing and hearing may not be limited to the length and breadth of the 9 states. The merit of the authentic transmission of the Kashaya is hardly encountered through the 10 directions. To encounter this merit, even if only for one day or for one night, may be the most excellent and highest thing. In the 10th lunar month, in the winter of the 17th year of Kajo, in Great Sung, China, 2 Korean monks came to the city of Kagan Fu. One was called Chigan, and one was called Kei-un. This pair were always discussing the meaning of Buddhist sutras. At the same time, they were also men of letters. But they had no Kashaya and no Patra, like secular people. It was pitiful that though they had the external form of bhikkhus, they did not have the Dharma of bhikkhus. This may have been because they were from a minor nation in a remote land. When Japanese who have the external form of bhikkhus travel abroad, they are likely to be the same as Chigan and such. Shakyamuni Buddha received the Kashaya upon his head for 12 years, never setting it aside. We are already his distant descendants, and we should emulate this. To turn the forehead away from prostrations idly done for fame and gain, to gods, to spirits, to kings, and to retainers, and to turn instead towards the humble reception upon the head of the Buddha's robe, is joyful. Preach to the assembly at Kanondori Kosho Horinji Temple on the first day of winter in the first year of Ninji.